It's great to be with you again on this beautiful, beautiful sunny morning here in northern New South Wales. It's particularly beautiful because we've had so much rain, weeks and weeks of it. The ground's really sodden, the water table's right up to the brim, but now the air is crisp and clear. It's been washed absolutely clean, and everything seems right with the world. So today, besides your responding to your questions, please feel welcome to text in your questions. Jai's there ready to take them and pass them on to me. We'll do a little bit of a harvest, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the flow frame design, just for fun. So if we just launch straight into the harvest, or actually just before that, one of the questions I get a lot, particularly in the UK, but sometimes in Australia, and definitely in the US as well, is what do we do about candied honey? Do frames candied honey is a real hassle when it's candied in honeycomb or in the flow frames. And so the usual way that beekeepers will deal with that is take the frames, either the flow frames or the conventional frames, and they've made up some sort of warming box to very, very slowly warm the honey to about 40 degrees, where it'll sort of liquefy again and you can extract again. So you can do that with flow frames. But the flow offers some advantages. That's why I wanted to talk to you now just as I harvest. And one is that you can sample the honey just from the, so if imagine this is full, just from the very, very end. And you do that by just, well, I'm going to do it now, inserting this key in just, half an inch, a centimetre. And it works the very first, we'll just see if it's going to do it. It's just working the very first segment. It's interesting, it's very jammed. So we might end up working the, oh no, there it goes. The very second segment. And so now you can see just that first drip coming. Now, we're not going to leave it like that because it's, a slow thing, but that's a way of just getting, 40, 50 mil, just a small amount of honey, which you could sample with your refractometer. If you're used to one of those, that tells you the moisture contact. And the reason you would do that, if you're worried about getting candied honey, if you know the bees are bringing in nectar that's from a candying, that creates a candying type of honey, is that you've usually just got a short window from when the honey ripens, when it's the right percentage and the bees are storing it, to when it starts candying. Often it won't candy actually in the hive itself. It'll be when you remove the honey, usually conventionally taking the whole box of frames off, the whole super off. Then the frames cool a little bit, and the honey candies in the frame. And so here now we've just got this tiny amount. Could sample that if we wanted with a refractometer, determine that yes, it's good to go. It's around that 18% moisture, and therefore you could harvest the whole frame. And of course you can just keep an eye on it, just taking a little bit at a time like this, saying, oh yeah, it's not ready yet. It's maybe 15%. We'll wait a couple more days and we'll harvest then, knowing that the bees will be fanning it off and getting it ready. That honey that's coming out is interesting. There's a few blobbles in it. Before, it's been raining here, and our paperbarks flower immediately after rain, which they have been doing. So this honey probably was stored before then. Anyway, so there we are sampling a tiny amount. If you decide that you want to sample for whatever reason, Of course, it might mean that you just want to take a little bit to give someone a taste and you're not really ready to take the whole frame yet. Or perhaps, you know, you just insert the key just this far in, a quarter of the way in. You're a quarter of a frame, which is about, so it's 2 litres in a frame. So that's, you know, 500 ml, a 500 ml jar of honey by inserting it that far. So perhaps for whatever reason, maybe you want to show it off 3 days in a row to your different friends that are coming, and so you want to do a little bit at a time. Anyway, you can do that with the flow frames. So there we go, the honey's just coming in quite steadily actually from just those very, very end segments of the flow frame. And now I will, maybe I'll give that example. We will just put it in, say, you know, a quarter of the way and operate it. It's just a guess. If you want, you can get really exact on that. So now we've got much more like, there's the frame, that orientation. We've got much more like about that much of the frame is being harvested. Of course, you want to take a note of that because from the end view now, it'll be looking empty, whereas 3/4 of the frame is still full. And so you need to, you know, write your notes in whatever way you keep your beekeeping notes about what you've been doing, and sometimes a photo or a video will help. So while that's draining, I did want to talk to you about, just if you're interested in the process of me and Cedar, you know, inventing the flow frames. And you're all familiar with the main part of the flow frame, which was the cells that sorry, excuse me. You're all familiar with the cells that split horizontal, that the honey can go down to the channel. But there were a whole lot of other aspects to making this whole thing work, and I was going to talk about the ends in a moment, but I think a question may have come in. Is that correct?
Yes, we've got a question from someone asking about pollen in the bottom of the trough.
Yep.
So
pollen in the honey collecting trough, or in the bottom tray.
Just find it for you, Stu.
Okay. So while Jai's finding that question, Cedar and I had designed this part of it, the essential sort of guts, you would say, of the flow frame and the way they work, but we hadn't figured out how it all would hold together and what the ends would be like. And you know, an aspect of inventing is just being able to throw out your preconceived ideas, which isn't always easy because you don't know that you've got these ideas. And we'd assumed that these frames would hang inside the beehive just like standard wooden or plastic frames do, and that therefore we'd be reaching through the back wall somehow to access, for the key to access and for the honey tube to access. And we were wondering how we were going to do that and how they would line up properly when I had this idea. Well, there was another problem too, and that is that the plastic polypropylene that the main part of the frame is made from, it's food grade of course and BPA free and so on, it's really high quality plastic, but it's not the right one for the ends. The ends have to be a lot stronger because most of you watching will already have been levering these out of a beehive, and you know that the bees will stick them all together with propolis. So the ends had to be quite tough plastic. And Cedar had this idea, okay, well we've got to make them accessible, we've got to make them tough. Why don't we make it out of polycarbonate, and why don't we make that clear? And if we did that, would we be able to make them join together at one end and actually form a wall, to form the outside wall of the hive? Great idea, I thought, but I don't know if either of us had realised what that would mean. It meant that you can see the bees, lovely bees, working up and down in between the frames, and you can actually see them go down into the endmost cell because the clear part forms the inmost cell. So you can watch the bees working down in the cells, watch their tongues licking in and out, watch them clean up the cells, and you can watch them jostling around in between the frames, and you can get a sense of how crowded the hive is from that, and you can just enjoy watching them. Sometimes they'll have a little sleep there, and you can tap on there and wake them up if you want. Anyway, so you get that lovely end view. And another thing we didn't realise with Cedar's idea of, well, let's make it out of clear ends, is that you'll be able to see the different colours of honey. And even on this hive, you can see there's some different colours there, indicating that the bees have separated the various nectars and are storing them separately. And when you harvest with flow frames, it's so easy just to access monofloral, honey, that is honey from just one source, and therefore just be tasting one plant, not a mixture of plants, when you're tasting your honey and putting it on your breakfast. How's that question going, Jai?
So we have a question here from Bill Robinson's asking, after a couple of seasons or at the appropriate juncture, what is the best method to clean the flow frames?
Right. Well, generally, you don't need to clean them, although sometimes I find when I look down the tube, before I put the honey tube in, when I look down the trough, it has got dirty, and in which case I'll take the key and get a wet bit of cloth, like a tea towel or something like that, and just poke it down the tube, poke it down this hole here, and maybe twist it a bit and pull it out. Usually I find a strip of cloth works best, and that's just to clean down in the trough. The bees should keep the frames themselves clean, but you're sort of right that after a while they get sort of stained from use, and there's not much you can do about that. You can, of course, take them out and use a pressure cleaner and perhaps a hot pressure cleaner. I've only used cold, and that does clean most of the excess wax off, but they'll never look brand new. They'll be clean as far as the bees are concerned, but they'll be stained by the wax and of the bees over time. The very end parts, though, the polycarbonate ends that I've just been talking about, it's really nice to have them clean. So if you're really, really keen to clean them, then you're going to have to carefully pull the frame apart. I wasn't going to go into that in this session, but perhaps we should do a session on pulling these apart, and so that you can really access this here, as a piece, and clean out each part, either with a pressure washer again or manually. But it's polycarbonate, but it will scratch it easily, so it's not easy. If you're keen to have ends, contact our customer support and we can send, you can buy some from us. But that's all a bit of a hassle, and generally the bees, they still look, these frames are a couple of years old, and so you can see they're covered in wax in various places. They don't look brand spanking new anymore, but they're quite serviceable, and the bees will keep all of this clean and ready for themselves. Remembering that the bees cover every surface of fine layer of wax, so even if there has been some impurity that's got stuck on the frames, the bees would cover that again with a layer of wax. So you don't have to worry about your honey, but it is nice to have them looking clean on the ends.
Thanks, Stu. Great answer. Before I ask you the next one, would you mind swizzling your chair over to the other side of the hive? It's going to make it a bit easier for our viewers to see you this morning.
Yep.
So our next question is from YouTube, from Chris Airy, and he says, "Hi Stu, I can't imagine how difficult the trial and error process was without the advantage of 3D printing back when you invented the flow frames. Can you comment on that?"
Yeah, well, 3D printing was available, not as good a quality as you can get now, and I guess the machine's a little bit more expensive, so we tended to we did send prototypes off to get 3D printed, but 3D printing even now finds it very, very difficult to do walls that are just a couple of mil thick to mimic how thin the bees make their wax comb. So we did use it, but we were forced to go into injection molding to make a decent prototype for the, to give us any sort of chance of success. And that, as many of you would know, is quite expensive. Certainly was for Cedar and I in those days. We didn't have any money at all, so we had to borrow, and lucky able to borrow from my dad for some of the prototyping. So, you can never really say, for most inventions, they're not an individual's effort, they're a whole group effort and a whole lot of factors coming together. I'm not sure what we would have done if my dad wasn't in the position to help us make those early prototypes. And of course I'm very, very grateful for my dad and the extended family and all the good friends that have helped in a myriad of ways to make this thing work. So 3D printing, was useful for some things, but it wasn't useful for the actual mechanism of the flow frames themselves. Now we've got a plane flying overhead, enjoying the big blue sky. So, is there some more questions while we're waiting for that plane?
Yeah, we actually haven't got too many questions coming in. Come on, people.
So remember, this is coming out quite slowly because I've only harvested, a quarter of the frame. So it doesn't have the push of the whole rush of honey, which is fine. But just in case you're thinking, oh, this seems to be so much slower than, normally we're not quite keeping up with it, it's pouring out. But I've deliberately made this just a small section of the frame, and so there's not a great rush of honey. There's a quarter of the amount as usual. Yeah.
Trevor Whitney's asking, do I need to coat the flow frames with wax?
Yeah, when they're brand new, I often rub some wax in. I might have some melted beeswax and a brush and just brush it over. You don't need to be thorough about it or anything. That they vary so much in what they will and won't do from colony to colony. So and building on this matrix so they build up their comb, and others just won't, for don't know why. So these they won't like the lumpy wax that you leave there and the blobbles of it and all of that, and they'll start cleaning before. Have to get
Okay,
really
Stu,
familiar
just
with
pause
them.
up for a minute. I think we've got some internet problems, unfortunately. Our stream has paused. Sorry everyone who's watching, we'll do our best to get it back online. YouTube and Facebook.
Everyone for that glitch in transmission. Don't know what it was, but I'm sure it was innocent. So I was talking about actually get the bees familiar with these flow frames because they're a little bit slow compared to other colonies in taking to them. Then you can put the flow super in the base and put the super above. Sorry, put reverse it, put them back into their normal order. But
Day. Thanks guys and love your work, Mario.
Thanks, Mario. Yeah, the short answer is yes, because Brisbane days are very mild, and so we hold shot bees when you open them up. And last time, get really, really familiar. Now, of course, there is a risk. Lovely thing to have your hands in a beehive and feel calm and interested and curious about what's happening in there. And somehow, after you get used to it and the bees get used to you, they sort of see you, it's my idea here, it's not the truth, they sort of see you as part of the hive. There's plenty of beekeepers that if they know their bees, they're used to them all, they'll just work their bees in shorts and a t-shirt, no veil, nothing, because somehow they have a manner and a way with them that the bees just don't get alarmed. Now, there'll be all sorts of things they will have probably done that you don't notice them doing. For example, they might not go around the front just because that's where the guard bees are, or just in the firm but gentle way they open the hive and look into it. But really, you can work towards that if you wish. It's enough familiarity that the bees don't feel threatened or stressed, and neither do you. So it becomes one of life's pleasures rather than a chore to have to inspect the bees.
They can actually recognise faces.
Yeah, Stone was just saying, oh, we've got the plane coming over again, that they can recognise faces. We're still discovering how extraordinary bees are in terms of their capability with their tiny but very, very compact brain. So I think bees recognise them, also know that if they've been away for a month or so, they might not get recognised immediately. Keeping an eye on the honey. maybe 350 ml jar, so that's didn't have a lot more that I'd prize for us with inventing these out of the frame. So not only he was testing the frames for us before flow frames taste just like when you bite into fresh honeycomb but without the wax. And he in particular, he loved the taste of it, and he would never give any. He had one flow at that time. He had an apiary of 40 or 50 hives. Yep.
Getting such bad connection, kill the stream today.
I'm really sorry. I'll have to tell that story another day. But happy beekeeping, and I'm sorry.